My 14-year-old daughter is in a wheelchair. On a quiet Saturday morning, she was rolling along our driveway in her chair, drawing colorful chalk pictures on the concrete to surprise her dad when he got home. Everything was sweet and peaceful. Then the HOA Karen stormed up the sidewalk, clutching a hammer she'd been using for her approved yard signs. She glared at my daughter and yelled, "Wheelchairs scratch the driveways and make the whole street look trashy. This isn't allowed." My daughter looked up, scared, and whispered, "I'm sorry, ma'am. I'll clean it up right now." That only fueled Karen's rage. She raised the hammer high and screamed, "I'll fix this myself." Before anyone could react, she swung it down hard, smashing into my daughter's wheelchair armrest and striking her shoulder. My girl cried out in agony as the chair tipped and she fell to the ground, clutching her bleeding arm, sobbing, "Daddy, it hurts so bad. Help." Karen stood over her, hammer still in hand, and sneered, "There. Now the driveway meets HOA standards." She didn't hear the thunder of a black truck with military plates screeching to a halt at the curb that exact second. My husband, a Navy SEAL who just returned early from deployment. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me where you are watching from, and please hit subscribe for more stories where the good guys always win. The driveway smelled like warm concrete and fresh morning air. It was one of those quiet Saturdays that felt borrowed from a better world. No lawnmowers, no traffic, just the soft scratch of chalk against cement. My daughter rolled slowly across the driveway in her wheelchair, stopping every few feet to admire her work. Bright blue clouds floated above a yellow sun. Stick figures with wide smiles held hands beneath it. She even drew our house the way she remembered it from before her dad deployed. Flag out front, porch light on, waiting. She wanted it perfect. Her father was coming home. She hummed to herself, the sound small but happy, and leaned forward to add a heart near the edge of the driveway. Her fingers were dusty with color, her cheeks warm from the sun. For a moment, everything felt normal. Safe. Earned. Then a shadow fell across the chalk. "Well, isn't this just an eyesore?" The voice was sharp enough to slice through the calm. My daughter stiffened and looked up. Marching down the sidewalk was the woman everyone on the street whispered about, the HOA enforcer, the self-appointed ruler of property values and petty power. She wore her usual tight smile and clipped posture, like she was constantly auditioning for authority. In her hand was a hammer, the same one she used every week to pound in her approved by HOA signs, as if the neighborhood itself needed reminding who was in charge. She stopped at the edge of the driveway and stared down at my child. "You can't do this," she snapped. "Wheelchairs damage concrete. And chalk like this makes the whole street look run down." My daughter's eyes widened. She wasn't used to being spoken to like that, like she was a problem that needed fixing. I'm sorry," she said softly. "I was just drawing. I'll clean it up. I promise." She reached for a rag she'd kept beside her chair, already trying to erase the sun she'd worked so hard on, but apologies only seemed to make the woman angrier. "Sorry doesn't fix violations," the HOA Karen barked. "Rules are rules." She lifted the hammer slightly, not yet swinging it, but enough to make her meaning unmistakable. My daughter froze. The chalk slipped from her fingers and rolled across the driveway, leaving a crooked red line behind it. "Please," she whispered. "I didn't mean to—" "I'll handle this," the woman interrupted, stepping closer, "since clearly no one taught you better." Time slowed in that awful way it does when your body knows something is wrong before your mind can catch up. My daughter tried to roll backward, but her wheels caught on the edge of the driveway. She looked small then, too small. Her hands trembled as she gripped the armrests, her eyes darting toward the house as if hoping someone, anyone, would hear. The hammer rose higher. Neighbors' curtains twitched. A dog barked somewhere down the street, but no one stepped in fast enough. The hammer came down, not with the cracking force the woman intended, but hard enough to strike metal instead of chalk. The impact jolted the wheelchair violently. The chair tipped, and my daughter cried out as she tumbled onto the grass beside the driveway, more startled than anything, fear pouring out of her in sobs she couldn't stop. She called for her father, not loudly, not dramatically, just one broken word whispered through tears. "Daddy." The woman stood over her, breathing hard, knuckles white around the hammer handle. She looked almost pleased, like she'd finally restored order. "There," she said coldly. "Problem solved." HOA standards met. That was the moment the ground seemed to shake. A deep engine roar cut through the air, growing louder by the second. A black truck turned onto the street too fast, tires screeching as it slammed to a stop at the curb in front of our house. The sound echoed off the quiet homes like a warning shot. The driver's door opened. Slowly. He hadn't been supposed to. Be home until next week. But there he was. My husband stepped out, dressed in plain clothes that couldn't hide the way he carried himself. Straight-backed, controlled, eyes already locked onto the scene in front of him. His gaze moved from the hammer, to the woman holding it, to our daughter on the ground. And in that instant, the peaceful Saturday morning was gone, because the man who had survived battlefields halfway across the world had just come home to find his child on the ground, and someone standing over her, and nothing would ever be the same again. The hammer clattered to the concrete, not because the woman suddenly felt remorse, but because the sound of the truck door slamming shut snapped her attention away from my daughter. Every head on the street turned. The black truck sat at the curb like it didn't belong in our quiet neighborhood, dusty from long miles, military plates catching the sunlight. The engine ticked as it cooled, the only sound loud enough to compete with my daughter sobbing. My husband didn't rush. That was the first thing I noticed. He stepped out slowly, deliberately, as if speed itself would give the moment too much mercy. His boots hit the pavement with a weight that carried more than just his body. It carried years of discipline, restraint, and things he'd learned never to explain. His eyes never left our daughter. She was on the grass now, supported by a neighbor who had finally run over, their hands shaking as they tried to comfort her. Chalk. Dust smeared her palms. One wheel of her chair lay tilted awkwardly where it had tipped. My husband's jaw tightened. The HOA Karen straightened her shoulders, recovering quickly. Authority was her armor, and she pulled it on without hesitation. "Sir," she said sharply, pointing at the driveway, as if presenting evidence, "your child violated HOA regulations. I acted within my authority." He stopped 3 steps away from her. He didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He spoke softly. "Step away from my daughter." The word daughter landed harder than any raised voice could have. Karen scoffed. "She should be taught." "That's not a request," he interrupted, his tone calm enough to be terrifying. "That's a boundary." For a moment, the woman hesitated. You could almost see the calculation happening behind her eyes. This wasn't how these confrontations usually went. People argued, people apologized, people backed down. But this man didn't look like someone who negotiated when lines were crossed. Still, she doubled down. "She damaged HOA property," Karen insisted. "Wheelchairs scrape concrete. Chalk lowers property values. I was enforcing the rules." My husband finally looked at her fully, and something in his expression shifted. Not anger, not rage, but a cold, precise focus that made the air feel thinner. "She's 14, he said. "She's disabled." And she was drawing pictures. Silence swallowed the street. Someone across the road started recording openly now, phone held high. Another N. Neighbors shook their head in disbelief. Karen laughed nervously. "Don't be dramatic. She's fine. I barely touched the chair." My daughter whimpered at the sound of Karen's voice, curling inward like she wanted to disappear. That did it. My husband stepped between Karen and our child, not touching her, not threatening her, just positioning himself like a wall that could not be moved. "You will not speak to her again," he said. "You will not approach her again. And you will not leave this street." Karen's face flushed. "You can't detain me." "I'm not," he replied evenly. "I'm protecting my child." Sirens sounded faintly in the distance. Someone had called the police. Karen's confidence cracked. She glanced up and down the street, realizing for the first time how many witnesses stood against her. The hammer lay abandoned at her feet, suddenly not a symbol of authority, but of a very bad decision. She tried to justify herself again. Reminder letters didn't work. "Parents like you think rules don't apply." My husband finally raised his voice. "Just enough. Enough." The word carried, not loud, but absolute. The kind of command that stops chaos mid-breath. Karen fell silent. He turned and knelt beside our daughter, his entire presence softening in an instant. He spoke to her gently, brushing chalk dust from her hands, steadying her breathing like he'd done 1,000 times before. "I'm here," he said quietly. "You're safe." She nodded, tears still slipping down her cheeks, but her shaken G began to slow. Behind them, the sirens grew louder. Karen took a step back, then another, and for the first time since she'd marched onto our driveway with that hammer, she looked afraid, because power, real power, had finally shown up, and it didn't need permission. My husband hadn't planned to come home that day. The deployment schedule had been clear. Another week, maybe more. Enough time that our daughter had been counting the days by crossing them off a calendar taped to her bedroom wall. Enough time that she thought this chalk drawing might help make the waiting hurt less. But plans have a way of changing. He'd driven through the night after receiving an early clearance, the kind that came without ceremony or explanation. No parade, no announcement, just miles of road and the quiet hope of surprising his family. He hadn't expected to arrive home to sirens in the distance, or to find his child on the ground. He knelt beside her now, blocking out the rest of the world. His hands moved carefully, checking, steadying, reassuring, while his voice stayed low and even, the way it always did when things were frightening. "Look at me," he said softly. She did. Her eyes were red, but they locked onto his instantly, as if everything else faded the moment she saw him. "I'm here," he repeated. "You're safe." She nodded again, gripping his sleeve like it was the only solid thing left. Around them the street had gone eerily quiet. No one spoke, no one moved. Even Karen seemed frozen a few steps away, arms crossed now, her earlier fury replaced by something tighter and sharper. "You can't just show up and intimidate people," Karen snapped, trying to reclaim control. "I have a duty to this community." My husband didn't look at her. Not yet. He focused on lifting our daughter back into her chair with the help of a neighbor, checking the brakes, making sure the wheels were aligned. Only when he was satisfied, only when our child was seated securely and holding his hand, did he stand. Then he turned. Up close, Karen finally seemed to understand what she was dealing with. This wasn't a man fueled by temper or impulse. This was someone trained to remain calm when everything else fell apart, someone who measured consequences before action, someone who didn't bluff. "You approached a minor," he said evenly. "You confronted her alone. And you used an object to assert authority." Karen scoffed, but her voice wavered. "I enforced HOA policy." "No," he corrected. "You abused it." The word hung in the air. A police cruiser turned onto the street, lights flashing. Then another. Karen's eyes flicked toward them, relief flashing briefly across her face, until she noticed where my husband was standing. Between her and our daughter. Unmoving. An officer stepped out first, scanning the scene. The tipped wheelchair, the chalk-covered driveway, the hammer lying on the concrete. "What happened here?" he asked. Before Karen could answer, 3 neighbors spoke at once. "She threatened." "Dee the girl. She knocked the chair over. She had a hammer." Karen's mouth opened, then closed again. My husband raised one hand, not to silence anyone, but to signal cooperation. "My daughter was drawing," he said calmly. "This woman confronted her. She's shaken and scared. I'd like to make a statement." The officer nodded, his tone shifting instantly. "Of course, sir," Karen sputtered. "This is ridiculous. I represent the HOA." The second officer picked up the hammer with gloved hands. "Ma'am, you can explain that at the station." Her face drained of color. "But I was authorized." "Not to do this," the officer replied. As Karen was escorted away, she twisted back toward us, eyes burning with indignation and disbelief. "This isn't over," she hissed. My husband didn't respond. He crouched back down in front of our daughter instead. She leaned toward him, voice trembling. "Daddy, I didn't do anything wrong, right?" He swallowed hard. "No," he said gently. "You didn't. You did something beautiful." She looked at the chalk drawing, smudged now, broken by tire marks and footprints, and then back at him. "I wanted you to see it." His throat tightened. "I did," he said. "And I'll remember it forever." The officers finished taking statements. An ambulance was offered and politely declined after a careful check. Neighbors lingered, some apologizing for not stepping in sooner, others promising they would never let something like this happen again. Eventually, the street began to empty. The sirens faded. The driveway stayed quiet. My husband wheeled our daughter inside, himself, pausing once at the threshold. He looked back at the chalk marks, the broken picture, the place where a quiet morning had turned into something else entirely. He knew this wasn't just about today. This was about what happened next. Because the man who came home early didn't just come home to rest. He came home to protect. And he wasn't going anywhere. By afternoon, the street no longer felt like the same place. Word spread faster than anyone expected. Not the twisted version, not gossip, the truth. Phones buzzed, doors opened, neighbors who usually nodded politely from a distance gathered in small clusters along the sidewalk, their expressions tight with disbelief and anger. The driveway, our driveway, had become the center of it all. Someone had already washed away most of the chalk, but faint colors still lingered in the cracks of the concrete. A pale yellow sun, a smudged blue cloud, evidence that something innocent had been interrupted. My husband stood near the porch with our daughter beside him, one hand resting lightly on the back of her wheelchair. He hadn't left her side since the police had taken Karen away. Every time a car slowed, every time a stranger glanced too long, he shifted subtly, protective without being obvious. Neighbors approached carefully at first. "I should have stepped in sooner," one woman said, her voice thick with guilt. "I saw her yelling, and thought, I thou. And it was just HOA nonsense." Another man shook his head. "I recorded it. Everything. If you need it, it's yours." More phones appeared. More confirmations. Multiple angles. Multiple witnesses. The narrative was no longer something anyone could control. By evening, members of the HOA board arrived. 2 men and 1 woman, all dressed like they were attending a meeting they desperately wished they could cancel. Their confident postures evaporated the moment they saw the crowd. They hadn't come to enforce rules. They'd come to contain damage. "We're deeply sorry," the board president began, hands raised in a placating gesture. "This does not reflect our values as an association." A murmur rippled through the neighbors. "Then why did you empower her? Why did no one stop this before? Why was she allowed to confront a child?" The board members exchanged glances. My husband finally spoke, quietly, clearly. "You gave one person unchecked authority, and today my child paid for it." No one interrupted him. The board president nodded stiffly. "We will be launching a full internal review." "That's not enough," someone said from the crowd. Another voice followed. "We want her removed permanently, and the policies rewritten, and public accountability." The pressure mounted. Cameras arrived, local news vans parking just far enough away to avoid trespassing. Reporters spoke in hushed tones while adjusting microphones. The story had escaped the neighborhood. Inside our house, my daw. Terror sat on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders. She watched through the window as people stood up for her, people who had barely known her name before that morning. "Daddy?" she asked quietly. "Are they mad because of me?" He knelt in front of her, meeting her eyes. "No," he said firmly. "They're standing because of you." Her brow furrowed. "I was scared." "I know," he replied, "and you were brave anyway." Outside, the HOA board's tone changed completely. "We will be suspending all enforcement actions immediately," the woman on the board announced. "Effective today." A cheer rose up. Someone shouted, "Dissolve it." The idea spread like wildfire. That night, the HOA's online forum exploded. Members demanded resignations, screenshots circulated, videos went viral, lawyers weighed in, disability advocates shared the footage with messages of outrage and solidarity. By midnight, the board issued a statement. By morning, they issued another. By the end of the week, the HOA no longer existed. Karen's name disappeared from the website. Her authority evaporated overnight. The same rules she once wielded like weapons were rendered meaningless. And the neighborhood changed. People waved now, stopped to talk, left chalk on the sidewalk, not as vandalism, but as a quiet act of defiance and support. Someone even taped a sign near our driveway, "Chalk welcome here." My daughter smiled when she saw it. For the first time since that morning, she picked up a piece of chalk again. She drew. Slowly, carefully. This time she added something new. Neighbors, houses, people standing together, and in the center, a girl in a wheelchair, upright, unafraid, surrounded by a community that finally chose to see her. The neighborhood had turned, not against us, but toward what was right. Consequences don't arrive with speeches. They don't announce themselves or wait for permission. They simply show up, quiet, heavy, unavoidable, and settle where denial once lived. For Karen, they began the very next morning. Her name was still on everyone's lips, but not the way she'd once enjoyed. Not as an authority, not as the neighborhood enforcer. This time, her name traveled alongside video clips, witness statements, and screenshots of messages she'd written over the years. Warnings, threats, fines sent with a smile sharpened into something cruel. The police report was clear. So were the witness accounts. So was the footage. By noon, she was no longer representing anyone. Her employer placed her on immediate suspension pending investigation. The HOA, what remained of it, issued a formal statement distancing themselves from her actions. Lawyers requested interviews. Advocacy groups requested copies of the video. And somewhere in the middle of it all, the woman who once wielded rules like weapons realized she had none left. At our house, the phone rang constantly. My husband handled most of it. Calm, direct, precise. He answered questions, gave statements, and refused interviews that felt or like spectacle than substance. He wasn't interested in fame or revenge. He wanted accountability. Our daughter stayed close to him, often sitting quietly with a book or drawing while conversations unfolded around her. She listened more than she spoke, absorbing the shift in the world, the way adults suddenly chose their words carefully around her, the way people asked permission before approaching. One afternoon, she finally asked the question she'd been holding in. Is she going to come back? My husband paused. No, he said truthfully. She won't. A judge granted a temporary restraining order within 48 hours. Karen was legally prohibited from coming anywhere near our home, our street, or our daughter's school. It was extended soon after, made permanent once the investigation concluded. She contested it. She lost. The charge wasn't what she expected either. Not a technicality, not something she could argue away with bylaws or jargon. It was about endangerment, about intimidation, about crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. In the courtroom, my daughter sat between us, small hands folded in her lap. She didn't cry. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. The evidence spoke for her. Karen avoided our eyes the entire time. When the ruling came down, it was quiet. No cheers, no gasps. Just a firm statement of fact. What happened was wrong, and it would not be tolerated. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, but my husband shielded our daughter from the cameras. He answered one question, and only one. What do you hope comes from this? He didn't hesitate. I hope people remember that rules exist to serve people, he said, not to hurt them. That soundbite traveled far, but the real change happened closer to home. The neighborhood didn't revert to how it had been before. It became something else entirely. A place where neighbors checked in, where kids played longer, where chalk drawings multiplied instead of disappearing. One evening, my daughter wheeled down the driveway again. She hesitated at first. T. Hen. She drew. She didn't draw houses or signs or trucks this time. She drew a line, a bold one, and on one side of it, she wrote a single word. Safe. My husband watched from the porch, arms crossed, eyes soft. When she finished, she looked up at him. Daddy? Yes? Do you think she knows she was wrong? He considered that carefully. I think, he said, she knows she lost control. My daughter nodded, satisfied with the answer. Because sometimes that's enough. Consequences didn't ask permission. They didn't need to. They arrived, did their work, and left behind something stronger than fear. Justice. The rain came 3 days later. It started softly, the kind that barely darkened the concrete, then settled into a steady rhythm that washed the dust from the street and cooled the air. From the living room window, I watched it soak into the driveway, tracing familiar paths through cracks and grooves worn by years of tires and footsteps. The chalk should have disappeared. That was how it always worked. But when the rain slowed and the clouds broke apart, something unexpected remained. Faint lines of color still clung to the concrete, a pale yellow arc where the sun had been, a blur of blue that once formed a cloud, a ghost of a heart near the edge of the driveway. My daughter noticed it before anyone else. She wheeled herself to the door and stared down at the concrete, eyes wide with wonder. It didn't go away, she said softly. My husband stepped up behind her. He rested a hand on her shoulder, gentle and grounding. Some things don't, he replied. She smiled at that. Life didn't return to normal after what happened. It shifted. Subtly at first, then all at once. People waved more. Cars slowed. Neighbors stopped to talk instead of rushing inside. The street felt awake in a way it never had before, like it had learned something it didn't want to forget. Someone left a small box of chalk near our mailbox with a note that read, "For whenever you're ready." My daughter held the chalk for a long time before using it. She rolled to the center of the driveway, took a deep breath, and began to draw. This time, she didn't rush. She drew herself first. Strong lines, steady hands, a wheelchair beneath her, not as an afterthought, but as part of the picture. Then she added our house, bigger than before, windows bright. She drew neighbors standing nearby, smiling, some holding umbrellas, others holding signs that simply said welcome. Last, she drew her father. Not in uniform, not larger than life, just standing beside her. When she finished, she leaned back and looked up at him. "Do you like it?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes were wet, though his voice stayed steady. "I love it," he said, "because it's honest." She nodded, satisfied. Later that evening, we sat on the porch together. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the driveway, making the chalk glow softly in the fading light. Somewhere down the street, kids laughed. A dog barked. Ordinar? Y sounds, reclaimed. My daughter rested her head against her father's arm. "Daddy," she asked, "are you staying home now?" He glanced at me before answering, then back at her. "For a while," he said. "Long enough." She smiled and closed her eyes. The neighborhood never forgot what happened, not because people kept talking about it, but because they changed how they acted. Policies were rewritten, training sessions were held, a new community group formed focused on accessibility and inclusion. Ramps appeared where there had been steps, signs changed, attitudes followed, and the driveway became something else. People added to it. A flower one day, a rainbow the next, a message on a birthday, a thank you note written in chalk after a hard week. The rain came again and again over the months, but pieces of the drawings always lingered, faint but stubborn, like memories that refused to be erased. One afternoon, my daughter traced one of the faded lines with her finger. "Daddy," she said, "this is my favorite place." He smiled. "Mine too." Because it wasn't just concrete anymore. It was proof. Proof that cruelty didn't get the last word. Proof that power could be answered with presence. Proof that a child's voice, quiet, shaking, brave, could change a street, a system, a way of thinking. The drawing never fully washed away, and neither did what it stood for.